Thank you, Idaho Realtors. As you know, yesterday we had a big day in Idaho politics. The 2024 primary election concluded last night. We're here to give you a rundown. Again, my name is Max Pond. I'm proud to be your Idaho Realtors Government Affairs Director, along with my friend and counsel for Idaho Realtors, Jason Risch. I will be covering some of the statewide stuff, election results here in a minute. But first, we're going to start with kind of a national spotlight with Jason Risch. So Jason, go ahead.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, on a national level, all the primaries don't fall together. So while in November we have one general election day that everybody watches and there's a lot of decisions made, that's not the same for primary elections. Primary elections are held in over a lot of different days and a lot of different time frames, varying by state. And so while a lot of them fall in May, we only had a few that happened yesterday. So there wasn't a ton of action on the national front. There was one race that everybody was watching, and that was the race for former Speaker McCarthy's race in California. He announced, after being ousted as Speaker, that he was done and he was retiring. And so they had a special election to fill his seat, but the special election would have involved, it involved a lot of folks. So everybody was watching that to see what the flavor was going to be. Ultimately, his handpicked successor won in California, which, if you're looking at Congress right now, that's the big thing that's going to happen in November, besides the presidential race, which we all know about, is going to be whether or not the majorities can be held in the in the Senate. Right now it's a Democrat majority, and in the House it's Republican majority. So just the way the dice are rolling, the Senate looks much more in play than the House does. The House is going to be very tight, I think, much more in play for Republicans. That's more beneficial, and that's just a sort of a crapshoot, because every 3 years they're all, a third of them are up. Every 6 years. They had 6-year terms, right? So every 2 years there's a Senate race. Can you tell I slept all of 4 hours? Sorry, it was a late night, ladies and gentlemen. We were up late watching results. Anyway, so that's really the one race that everybody was watching in California. We learned from that it was the individual that was Trump backed and looks good for Republicans. If you're saying the Republicans need to hold the House, that was a good sign to the extent that you could really read much into it at all. It was just a single race. There were some other races that happened out there. I think it was in Kentucky. We had a Republican incumbent that held their seat. The same thing happened in Georgia. The Democrat incumbent held their seat. Again, these were primary races, so they were surviving challenges from either the farther right and the farther left. Generally speaking, not much changed, except there was something interesting in Oregon, where it seemed that Oregon obviously is a blue state and was leaning further and further blue. That changed a little bit last night. Some of those more progressive candidates got defeated in favor of some more mainstream Democrats. So it might appear that Oregon sort of reached its maximum swing on that going left. So that's something that folks are kind of reading into it. On a national front, here in Idaho, you have 2 congressmen up. This is not a year where we have either of our state senators running or United States senators running. So we had 2 congressmen, as we do every 2 years. Our congressman, Russ Fulcher, is on the ballot, but he was unopposed in the primary. Mike Simpson was on the ballot. He would be the congressman from Eastern Idaho, Eastern Idaho to half of Ada County. The
second congressional district.
Thank you, second congressional district. He did have a primary challenger. Really wasn't much of a race. While he ran against somebody who's been on the ballot before.
Ran for Senate, ran for I think governor maybe or
something. Yeah, and so
kind of a perpetual candidate.
Yep. Yeah, and he's out there, and he works it. I mean, he's got a lot of signs. If you saw him, he's got those yellow and black signs that are out there, really strong, I think, in the sign campaign, but not well funded. And when you're going to run a congressional race, it takes more than just putting up some yard signs here and there. And of course, Simpson's known in some places, for better or for worse, he's a well-known commodity in Idaho. So it really wasn't much of a race. Simpson won handily, and although there were some places where it was tight for Simpson, I think, in little pockets of Idaho, but generally speaking, it went well for him. So from a national standpoint, that's kind of where we're at.
So what about we mentioned kind of the Senate might be in play pretty well for the Republicans. Right. What are some of those general, now that we're past the primary, what are some of those general elections that might see some of those power shifts?
Oh, it's interesting because I think it's all over. We're going to be looking at some stuff in Nevada. I think Nevada is probably the #1 thing that folks are watching. Arizona, some of those states that are those, I don't know, you call them purple, I guess, ish, that, again, this is just the roll of the dice. Every 2 years, you've got United States senators on the ticket. And sometimes there's a lot of Democrats on the ticket. Sometimes there's a lot of Republicans on the ticket. And it just, it's sort of that's the roll of the dice, like I said, as to how it comes out right now, just because of the way that it's shaped up. And this isn't because of Trump or Biden or any of that other stuff that's going on and out there. The weaker Democrats are on the ballot. And that's why it's going to look better for Republicans to take out some of those Democrats versus another year where you could say, oh yeah, there's a lot more Democrats up, but we've got the solid Democrat states where they're up, not purple states, that type of thing.
So what do you think Tester in Montana is vulnerable?
I think that one's
again, another really well-known commodity in the state.
Absolutely. And last time around there was some, it was an interesting race to watch that. And a lot of folks thought that last time around. So I don't know. It's I think that the political climate right now is definitely, watching Montana is going to be part of it as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, be sure to put those in the chat bar. We will definitely try to get to at least a few of those as we get to the end of the webinar today. So
before I leave national, should talk about the presidency. We should say it, right? It's there. I checked the poll numbers before today, and as you know, all across America, there's lots of polls that happen, and they poll different states and they poll all over. There's a place called Real Clear Politics that collects all those polls and they kind of average them, and it's centered in. To the extent the polls tell us anything, right? I mean, you can go back to the first Trump election and wonder why we even look at them anymore. But they're polling absolute neck and neck. It is right now, as of today, it's Trump by 1. They are 46.8 for Trump and 45.8 for Biden.
And so what is that, a national?
That's that's the average. Sorry, that's looking at all those polls in the different states, and then they average it all together. They kind of throw it in a big mixing pot and average everything. And it's it's a pretty good barometer of looking out, because obviously you can poll in one state, and if it's the red state or blue state, it's going to be skewed. But they poll them, put them all together, they average them out, and then Real Clear posts their guess. And right now, even with all the lawsuits happening and all the stuff that's going on and everything with Biden and all that, it's still absolutely 1 percentage point neck and neck, which is, as you know, a toss up.
Yeah. So it is quite a crazy political environment. So any of the polling that you've seen as far as in some of those, what they call swing states. So, the Pennsylvanias, the Arizonas, the Michigans, what are the polls kind of looking like there? Have you seen anything there?
I think it's too early to see. I think in Minnesota you start to see that. That's the one that kind of caught my attention, is that Biden's starting to poll a little better in Minnesota. Last time I saw it. But I think we're in that spot right now where we're just rolling into the summer where nobody cares about politics anymore. It's sort of that vacuum. I mean, normal people other than us don't care about politics. During the summer, they got other better things to be spending their time on. And so we kind of go into that vacuum where the polling, I think, has already started showing that they're just not as accurate. They're not as reliable. Of course, they just fire up red hot again in August, and then we'll know exactly, we'll start seeing exactly where this thing's going to go. But for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's going to be another very, very close election.
So do you have any predictions as far as House majorities, Senate majorities, and then we'll move on to statewide?
I think the Senate looks good. I mean, obviously we're vested in that. In Idaho, we have 2 United States senators that are ranking in some seriously important committees. Yeah. If the Senate flips, then they will become the chairman of those 2 committees, which is where they were before. It's a really special thing for Idaho to have folks in those positions for being such a small populous state. It's a good position for that. So I feel like right now, looking at it, it looks pretty good. Like I said, just because of the way the races are lined up, it looks good for the Senate. I think the House is going to be a fight. I think it's a toss up right now. Yeah,
it's good. You mentioned I think I've heard it a lot of times say that Idaho, although we have a smaller kind of congressional delegation, we've got some major players in great positions, whether it's your dad in international relations, intelligence, Senator Crapo in the budget side of things, taxation side. Obviously on the House side, we've got Simpson on appropriations. and Fulcher and kind of the environmental space. So
Yeah,
we really do kind of hit above our weight. So
and ultimately, you know, in the House a little bit different, but in the United States Senate, there are 100 of them. And so everybody, doesn't matter if you come from, you know, the state of New York that has literally tens of millions, or I don't know how many, you know, what their population is, they have precisely 2 votes, the same as Idaho has precisely 2 votes. And so that's, like you said, it's a pretty good feather in Idaho's cap.
Yeah. All right. Well, Idaho Realtors, if you do have any questions on the national front, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll go ahead and start transitioning to some statewide stuff. I will start with really kind of an overall 30,000-foot view picture. Idaho Realtors got involved in 55 legislative races. That's state senators, state legislators, and we won 41 of those races. It's about a 74% winning percentage. In fact, it's fairly similar, at least overall percentage, to what we saw in 2022. The last primary election cycle. So that's kind of on par for what we've seen. One thing that we certainly haven't seen that we saw this year is the sheer spending amount on the independent expenditure level.
And maybe you should touch on that when you said, you know, those are the races that Idaho Realtors played in. What was it that you guys do through the PAC? I mean, what type of contributions I use?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So our PAC does everything under the sun when it comes to political activities. That is, you know, cutting checks, campaign checks to these folks. So, you know, in Idaho, per election cycle, it's $1,000 maximum. Idaho Realtors usually maxes out as far as campaign contributions go. So we do campaign contributions, we do independent expenditures. Independent expenditures can be anything from, you know, all those lovely mailers you get in the mail.
One or two. Yes,
one or two of them.
I got a couple.
You get text messages. Right. You get digital touches, whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, surfing the web. Also live calls. It could be polling, could be door knocking. So really anything under the sun as far as political campaign strategies go, our PAC is involved in that regard. So again, 41 of those 55 races we won. Which are good. We can go into some of the details there in a little bit if you'd like, but kind of outside of some of those legislative races, Idaho Realtors did get involved in actually the Twin Falls sheriff race this year.
Oh, okay.
And we did pull out a win there. I think his name is Jack Johnson, not the musician, but the new sheriff over there in Twin Falls County. And then also we helped a county commissioner up in Kootenai County as well. So again, those are your RPAC dollars don't just go to state races and the constitutional races, of course, but
all the way
local,
down to,
all the way down to the local level. I did mention the sheriff. That's the first time we've gotten involved in one of those races, but in the past we have gotten involved in school district races as well. So all levels, local, state, and national, your RPAC dollars go into work for you. So I kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I do want to touch on 2 pretty major surprises that I saw. Again, we mentioned some of the money. I'll go a little bit more in depth on that, especially because this year, you know, when you go to the polls, you notice that there was no governor there. There was no attorney general on the ballot.
You mentioned United States senators.
No,
the smallest one we ever had.
Yeah, and even with that, we saw about $4.5 million in independent expenditures, just independent expenditures being spent. Now, again, it's notable because I think no governor on the ballot, no U.S. senators on the ballot. So to have that much money spent in this type of an election
on legislative races,
we really have not seen that before.
It's unheard of.
And I think that you know, it's only going to continue to grow. What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, we saw this, I think we sat here 2 years ago, we had this conversation, and that was a race where we did have governors, you know, constitutional officers on, as well as United States senators. That was a pretty decent campaign, but the money that flowed that year, I said this 2 years ago, I was shocked then. I'm even more shocked now. It just keeps coming and coming. And now I think the difference is, whereas, you know, maybe 4 years ago, we pretty good organized in Idaho, some high wealth individuals that were contributing, some just folks gathering, you know, the smaller donations and pooling them together. It wasn't necessarily out of state influences that played, but that changed this year. There's no doubt that the out-of-state influences is there.
Are we still on?
We're good.
Okay.
Sorry, we lost our screen.
All right.
So yeah, so out-of-state money. So yeah, it's I don't see that changing, and that was that was a lot of money for. In fact, prior to this, there was a floatorial district before redistricting back in the 90s, and there was at one point in time a legislative seat that represented all of Ada County. So Ada County had its individual districts, 17, 18, 19, but then they had to, the way that they dealt with some of the populations, they did what was called a floatorial, meaning individuals ran for the entire county. So everybody, Eagle, Meridian, Boise, Kuna, all of them voted. And that was a race that my father, it was District 21 that my father ran in and won. And prior to that, this recent stuff, that was the most expensive legislative race in history, because it was, like 3 times the size of a normal race. And so you had to touch way more people, and it was just kind of one of those things that was, but now these numbers don't even compare to what we did back in the 90s.
Yeah.
It wasn't even, it's not even close to the same.
Well, and so you did mention some of the outside money that's coming, now coming to Idaho. It's probably not ever going to leave now. This is now that they're in here. So let's cover a little bit of some of that out of state money that's coming in. So the first one, well, actually, here we go. So Make Liberty Win. This is kind of, you may have read a little bit about the Young Americans for Liberty PAC that's been doing some work in Idaho. They spent a little over $655,000 statewide this election cycle. Another one from Fairfax, Virginia, spent a little over $398,000. That's the Citizens Alliance of Idaho PAC. Again, a kind of a Citizens Alliance kind of Idaho chapter. And then also the Idaho Federation for Children, which is the Idaho chapter of the American Federation for Children. Again, kind of a pro-choice school, a school pro-choice PAC.
Right. Actually, so the school choice.
Oh,
you said it twice. You got it. Yeah.
There you go.
Not pro-life, pro-choice. It's school choice.
That's what I meant. But anyway, they spent a little over $302,000 in the state this year for this election cycle. So again, a lot of money, not just from Idaho PACs, including Idaho Realtors, but a lot of outside PAC money coming into Idaho.
Although just because it's an outside PAC doesn't always show that it's an outside, like the Federation of Children, that's Scott's, right? Isn't that July Scott's? So it's some, in that particular instance, it's some individual that has put a lot of money into their national PAC, and then some that just naturally trickles back because sometimes you can market or steer it in certain ways.
So one other thing that I'll mention really quickly that was kind of notable was some of these PACs are federal PACs, and so they're not necessarily registered with the state, and so some of that spending can kind of go without being seen for a little while. And
it used to. So interestingly enough, there was one individual who was concerned about this, Senator Winder, who you will touch on here momentarily, who was concerned about this. And he ran a bill that said, look, if you're, because there was a very small loophole in the federal law. And so just what he's talking about is, if you are a PAC, well, it's easier if we do it like this. If you're a candidate running in Idaho, you're going to register and report to our Idaho Secretary of State, Phil McCrane. If you are a federal candidate running for a federal office, so any of our congressmen or 2 senators, you register with the Federal Election Commission in DC. So PACs do the same thing. So you can have a PAC that is an Idaho PAC, and traditionally that's been where the action was here in Idaho. And those folks all report to our Idaho Secretary of State. And our deadlines for reporting are based off of our primaries. And so, the point of doing the reporting is that any PACs, anybody that's doing independent expenditures or spending money, has to do reports. And as we get closer to election, they do 48-hour reports. So you have to report that you're spending this money, so everybody can keep an eye on what's happening. In the federal side, it's very similar, but there was a loophole because it's not necessarily based off our May primary. There was this window where you could be a federal PAC spending some money, and it might not have to be disclosed until next month. Well, that doesn't do you a lot of good if you're Chuck Winder and you were, watching a federal PAC try to spend some money. So they tried to close that loophole a little bit by passing a new law that they got through that said if you're a federal PAC, you still have to do some reporting in Idaho. It came at the end of the session, and it got movement at the end of the session. It was printed a while in, but then it looked like it wasn't going to go anywhere, but then did come shooting out there at the end. So it'll be interesting is whether or not everybody paid attention to that and knew that that new law was there and was in effect for this election.
Well, from what I was able to gather, and the reason I know this is because it was the Retire Career Politicians PAC that really targeted Speaker Moyle this cycle. Right. And they weren't filing correct reports, or it was something like that. So Moyle was a bit on a help path, I guess you could say, to figure out what was going on. And so the Secretary of State's office, I think it was on like April 18th or something, did have to issue a letter just reminding everyone of their reporting requirements.
And it was actually providing clarification for us, because for federal candidates, the way the law was written, it said, well, if you're a federal committee, which is both a PAC and a reelect, then you have to do X, Y, Z. Well, the federal candidates kind of got caught up in this a little bit too. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. I mean, I know what you're trying to do, but you caught some other folks in that conversation. So there had to be some clarification, I think, on that law that was important. And I think also what's here is when Max talks about these numbers, as he said, you can only contribute $1,000 to a candidate. And so when these folks come in and they do these independent expenditures, a candidate, unless they have a sizable war chest and they're ready to go, can't respond to a $300,000 drop in a legislative race. If somebody buys media at $300,000, unless you've got that $300,000 sitting there, which you got $1,000 at a time, right, to make your 300, that's all you've got to do. So you can't move as quick as a candidate. And that's why a lot of these reporting deadlines are in there, because as a candidate, you're just not as fluid unless it's a self-funder that can put their own money in. You can't do what these PACs can do, which is just drop, they can go out and do that. And so a candidate, Chuck Winder or something like that, was looking at somebody who comes and drops a ton of money on him. If he didn't have it sitting there ready to go to defend it, he needs somebody to come to his rescue. But these are independent expenditures, meaning you can't coordinate with Winder. So if IR wanted to help Winder or any candidate who was maybe subject to this type of attack, IR can go out and buy the TV, they can print the ads, they can do everything, but they can't necessarily work with the candidate. So that's just kind of some inside politics too that makes all this so interesting, and it's why the money is so important part of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess that's a perfect kind of transition to the last part of my surprises from yesterday. You mentioned Chuck Winder, Senate Pro Tem, District 20. I think he was going to be entering his maybe 16th year or something in the Idaho legislature. Lost by about 300 votes, a little under 300 votes, I think, last night. Obviously, a tough loss, I think, for the Idaho Senate in general. Idaho Realtors has always been had a great relationship with Chuck. He's used to be in the industry as well. But that was a tough,
right?
Yeah. In fact, if Gail Hartnett is online, I know that Gail has known him for about 25 years or something like that.
Yeah, he's when Max says President Pro Tem of the Senate, that is our #1 in Idaho. That's the #1 spot, right? It's not the majority leader like it is in the national level. The President Pro Tem runs the Senate in Idaho, and that was Senator Winter's job for the last I was trying to think about this morning. Is it?
I think
3,
yeah,
3 or 4,
that
he's been the leader. So for the top #1 guy, and with being the top guy, you do have a bit of a target on your back. But for the top guy to be taken out, obviously that's a feather in the cap for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, another example of how all of this big money coming in can have huge impacts at the local level there. So that's District 20. Obviously, a big surprise there. Another couple districts that were surprising to me were District 24, 25 in the Magic Valley area, Twin Falls area. Known historically as a fairly moderate place, a lot of farmers, a lot of ranchers in that area, a lot of cattlemen. But District 24 and 25 in the Senate and both House seats, we saw a lot of changes there too. Unfortunately, some of our realtor champions lost those races as well. So
yeah, I was surprised as well. I think as you've looked across Idaho and you've watched and this is, we're talking about Republican races because that's really what was going on, but it's obviously the Democrat had their primary too. But when you looked at the Republican races, what this was all about was it was Republican on Republican as primaries are, but it was a right side versus what they called more moderate, which is not a proper term probably because I guess it all depends on where you're from. But you had the mainstream and you had the what people say the far right or whatever vernacular you want to use. So that's really what the fight was about. You start the far right, if you're going to use that term, made some inroads into Kootenai County years ago, Eastern Idaho. They they worked there in Boise. You saw Canyon County go down. Well, shouldn't say go down. I don't want to say one side or the other, which is better or worse. Obviously, we're all Republicans. We all get along to certain degrees. But you saw the influence Canyon County, but Twin Falls was always sort of a holdout, and obviously that's not the case anymore. So that that shows that there are folks working hard on both ends of that sort of factions of the party, and that they're working very hard to get the candidates elected.
Well, and so the kind of the trickle down effect of Pro Tem Winder losing obviously is the leadership in the Senate now.
It will,
and how is that new leadership, because that's going to affect again the top spot there with the Pro Tem, but then as you go down to majority leader, majority caucus chairman, I mean that's all going to be impacted by that. And the other thing is how's that new leadership going to interact with the House side leadership now?
Yeah, and what Max is saying is they'll get together in December, and they get behind closed doors, and it's a party thing, and they just they have an election for leadership, and anybody can do it. I mean, you can have somebody who's brand new, literally can run, and it's not very common. It's rare, actually. I can't tell you this. Somebody that got a top nod on being a freshman, newly elected. I know it happened 2 years later on a few occasions, but anyway, so they get behind the door. And but if you've got the support, right? So if there is this sort of right wing, then mainstream, or however you want to label them, if there is more support in one or the other, they could take all that leadership over. And then how do they work with what's going on in the House? The same thing could happen in the House, and we saw some power struggles there. Blanks was probably on your list of people you're going to touch, but yeah, the leadership is definitely going to be mixed up.
Yeah, will be interesting to watch. As we kind of look to November, anything on the kind of national front besides the balance of leadership, but specifically in Idaho? I mean, obviously, the general election here in Idaho kind of happened last night, right?
Yeah, there's not. I mean, there are candidates, right? We have candidates. We have two constitutional folks that ran last night. There's actually a Constitution Party in Idaho. The pro-life. That's his real name, pro-life.
He changed it.
Legally changed his name to pro-life, but then there was somebody else who also did the same thing, changed their name to Idaho Law. And so the ballot literally read pro-life versus Idaho Law. Those are the two choices you had. So there will be other races that will happen in November at a national level, but as far as Idaho goes, those have never gotten any traction whatsoever. Like you said, the race for our national level folks happened last night, and with Simpson getting through and Fulcher being not challenged, they will go to the general election, and they will be elected again, undoubtedly. So I don't know that there's too much to watch on a national front for Idaho. Where I think it's going to be the presidential the race.
Yeah. So at least for Idaho Realtors and here in Idaho, state legislative races. We will have a few races come November that we'll be getting involved in, particularly in District 26. I think both the Senate and the House there, and this again goes to show you how the impact of our PAC and that we really do help out folks that are good to the industry. In District 26, we'll be likely helping out a Republican in the Senate there. And then obviously one of our champions there is Representative Ned Burns, a Democrat. So we'll be playing in the general election there with those folks. District 29 in Pocatello also is kind of another one of those swing districts. I would imagine that we'll be helping again in the Senate, Senator James Recchi, who's a Democrat, Representative Manwaring, who's a Republican. So those are two, I think, important races that at least Idaho Realtors will definitely be looking to in November. So we'll see how that shakes out. It'll be interesting to watch though.
And it was interesting because I think Eastern Idaho, 2-4 years ago was farther on that right side of that. And yet I think it's obviously, we know because of the elections happened 2 years ago, it's swinging back toward more moderate, which then, makes those races, the Republican, Democrat, the general, more of a race and more interesting.
Yeah. Well, Nick, do we have any questions coming through? Because I want to get those before we get too long here. But no questions. All right.
Okay.
Well, I do quickly before I forget. I want to thank the trustee committee. You and I work with them a lot. Obviously, we couldn't do the work that we do on the political landscape here in Idaho without their engagement, without their direction, and obviously the investment from all of our Idaho realtors when it comes to RPAC. So I want to quickly make sure that I give a shout out to the trustee committee. You guys are amazing. So appreciate you enabling us to get involved and have an impact across Idaho. Talked a little bit about that.
And you might, I mean, the process that you guys go through. I mean, Max obviously Max is your full-time employee that does this, eats, sleeps, and breathes it. The trustee committee, probably secondary to that, but Max brings forward recommendations, and he lays out all the races in Idaho, what they're going to look like, which ones are competitive, and he puts that in front of the committee. And the committee literally goes line by line and goes through, starts in North Idaho, works their way down, and then over to Eastern Idaho, analyzing each one of those races and whether or not that is this a race that you guys want to get involved with? Are either the candidates on your issues, which is obviously private property rights and protecting the folks' dream of home ownership and all of those things that you guys do. The committee looks at it with that lens and decides, yeah, this person is our champion, this person's our not, like you talked about. There's Republicans, there's Democrats. Even came up to a sheriff's race. Somebody threw that up for the committee to consider. They looked at it and somebody said, well, why would we get involved in a sheriff's race? So then another member of the committee said, well, this is why, and here's what's going on. And at the end of the day, the committee thought, oh yeah, that's a good point. Let's do that. And so it's a great process. And the committee, like most IR committees, it's diverse, right? It's all over. So you get people from North Idaho who have knowledge on North Idaho races and what's going on there, and then you get people, all across the state that can chime in and comment on whether they support it or they don't support it. And sometimes it's not always Max's recommendations, much to his chagrin. I know he wants to just let it go. Sometimes, he'll make recommendations and the committee just says, we don't want to get involved in that race, or hey, yeah, this person looks like they're gonna have trouble, but at the end of the day, their opponent really helped us out on something last session. And so, even being sidelined is a win for somebody sometimes. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's, and then of course there's always the folks who didn't help us in a session those folks need to know. I mean, the way this works is you guys put your hard-earned money into this RPAC and you do it for a reason and for your industry. And so when somebody's not helping you and not helping your industry, not only is it important to support those who help you, it's important to get rid of the people who don't. I mean, that's just politics. That's the way it works. And every PAC does the same. In fact, there are some PACs who don't do anything but try to get rid of people, right? There's no support. There's no positive messaging at all. They're just anti somebody. And so you guys do that as well, but the committee does work good, and I know that they put a lot of time and effort into it, and they are hard workers and they care about this stuff. So yeah, it's a good process.
Well, I do want to just kind of end on one last thing, and I just want to let you guys know that as you can tell, Idaho politics is changing. There's a lot more money involved,
no doubt,
and it's certainly not going back to the way it used to be. I think that is really a driver for us to double down on our efforts of advocacy, our efforts of fundraising, and our efforts of engagement. So
yeah, you cannot overstate that. I mean, that's the one thing we can take away from this election is, especially now with this out-of-state money. When you get folks from out of state looking nationwide, and they played here in Idaho, but they were not exclusive to Idaho. They're playing in other races in other states. Idaho is still relatively cheap. Anybody who knows this and lives and works here, compared to New York City or California or something, like the cost of living, the cost of media, the cost of yard signs, the cost of getting the message out to people is based generally on the size of the state that you're dealing with. So smaller populations, it's easier to get out and touch everybody. Larger populations, it costs you a tremendous amount of money. So when this out-of-state money comes here, and I know I've been on those calls before where out-of-state people are saying, hey, we'd like to come in, and what does this look like? And we start looking at budgets and helping PAC or whatever out, they're shocked with how far their money goes in Idaho. And so, I mean, they can't, like we were talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars that came into a race, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's a tremendous amount of money. They spend millions on these exact same races in California and New York. So if you're an outside group and your job is to collect money from your members all across, or your like-minded folks all across America, and then spend that money on candidates, maybe it's a pro-gun candidate, maybe it's a pro-choice candidate, maybe it's a school choice candidate, whatever. If that's your job, is to go out and spend that money, you get way more bang for your buck in Idaho than you do anywhere else, right? So they can say, hey, I can I can spend money on 6 different candidates in Idaho, or I can go against one in California. And so as a result, I think we're going to start seeing more of these folks. Like you said, they're not going to go away. In fact, I think it gets more and more of that outside money coming in. So now you've got your RPAC, Idaho citizens contributing to an Idaho PAC, but you're competing against all those other national PACs that are out there. And you cannot, I mean, it was, for those of us that have been doing this for a long, long time, it was not that long ago that Idaho had about 5 PACs, and they were the players. And realtors have always been the top. IACI comes to mind. There's a lot of other folks that there was only about 5 of them, and they worked at the legislature when they had issues. People listened, people paid attention. That is no longer the case, and you're now just one PAC amongst dozens, if not hundreds out there, and you're not even the most well-funded PAC out there. And that's something that everybody who's listening to this should take that message to heart and say, what are we going to do? We live here in Idaho. We have this industry. We want to protect this industry. What are we going to do to help protect that? And one of the answers has got to be, you have to spend more money. Your PAC absolutely has to grow and take it to the next level, because everybody else is neck and neck with you, and you're getting beat by some of them. And that's fact of life. And so if you hear nothing else about today, right, hear me now, believe me later.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you can take away from this.
Well, Idaho Realtors, we really appreciate you guys joining us. Late night last night, but still a good night. Overall, I think that walking away from a election night is, you always learn something at least, right?
It's always interesting. There's no doubt about it. Every time you think you know what's going to happen, you don't. It's an interesting night.
Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Stay tuned as we get closer to November. We'll have an election guide coming out for the November elections as well. If you guys do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And we hope to see you very soon. Stay engaged. Thank you.
Stay, everybody.